"Do it to me and don't beat around the bush," said the Apache woman. "The cowboy did it, and the town wanted to kill him." The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty plains when Jimmy Callahan rode into the small frontier town of Red Willow. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of years spent under the open sky. His hat was pulled low, shading his sharp eyes, and his boots were caked in the mud and dust of the long trail he had traveled. The townsfolk could hear the familiar creak of his horse's saddle before they even saw him, and as he passed by, whispers began to rise. Some people knew of Jimmy's reputation, a man who didn't shy away from danger, a man who had once faced a gang of bandits alone and come out alive. Others were less certain, unsure if he was a hero, a troublemaker, or both. As he entered the town, the wooden sidewalks groaned under his boots, and the wind carried the smell of smoke and fresh bread from the small bakery at the corner. Children playing in the dirt paused to watch him, their eyes wide with curiosity. Breaths. Jimmy gave a small nod to a few of the older men sitting on benches outside the saloon, but he didn't stop. He was a man on a mission, though he hadn't yet realized what that mission would truly demand from him. Red Willow was not a large town. It had a single main street lined with weathered wooden buildings, the saloon, the sheriff's office, a general store, and a small church at the far end. The town seemed quiet enough, but anyone who had spent time on the frontier knew that appearances could be deceiving. Trouble often hid behind calm faces, and danger could appear when it was least expected. Jimmy sensed that as he rode slowly down the street, eyes following him from every doorway and window. He dismounted in front of the saloon and tied his horse to the post outside. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, and the smell of tobacco, whiskey, and dust filled his nostrils. A few men looked up from their cards and mugs, their expressions ranging from curiosity to mild suspicion. Jimmy didn't bother with greetings. He walked straight to the bar and ordered a coffee. Black. Best. New in town, huh? The bartender asked, polishing a mug. Depends on what you mean by new, Jimmy replied, his voice calm but firm. Rest. I'm just passing through. The bartender shrugged, sensing there was more to the man than he let on, but he didn't press further. He poured the coffee and slid it across the counter. Jimmy took a slow sip, his eyes scanning the room. He noticed the usual mix of people, cowhands, traders, and a few families who had lived in the town for years. But there was also a sense of tension, something unspoken that hung in the air like the heat of the midday sun.
Then she walked in.
Tala, an Apache woman, stepped into the saloon with the confidence of someone who had faced danger all her life. She was tall, strong, and her eyes were sharp, like they could see straight through a person's intentions. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her clothing, though simple, spoke of practicality and readiness. She moved directly toward Jimmy, her gaze unwavering. The room seemed to hold its breath as she approached him. You, she said, her voice steady and commanding. I need your help. Jimmy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. My help? With what? He asked, trying to sound casual, though he could feel the weight of her stare. There's no time for small talk, she said, placing a hand on the counter. Do it to me and don't beat around the bush. My people are in danger and the town refuses to act. I need someone who isn't afraid. Someone who can do what needs to be done. The words hit Jimmy like a spark. He had dealt with danger before, faced men who threatened towns, but this was different. There was something in Tala's voice, a mixture of urgency and determination that made him sit up straighter. He could tell she was serious, and he could also sense that helping her would not be simple. Why me? He asked cautiously. There are other men in town. Surely one of them could... They're afraid, she interrupted sharply. Breaths. They care more about their property than about people's lives. You're not afraid, are you? He had been called many things in his life. Reckless, brave, stubborn, but afraid was rarely one of them. He met her eyes and saw no fear there either, only only purpose. "No," he said finally. "I'm not afraid." Tala nodded once sharply, as if she had been waiting for that answer. Breaths. She lowered her voice. "Then we leave tonight. There's no time to waste. If we don't act soon, more of my people will suffer. And I won't ask again." Jimmy took another sip of his coffee, thinking quickly. He knew that helping her would put him in danger, not just from the gang threatening her people, but also from the townsfolk who might not understand or approve. But he had never been one to walk away from a challenge, and something about Tala's determination spoke to his sense of justice. "All right," he said finally. "Bask." "I'll help, but I need to know everything." The names, the places, the risks. No surprises. Tala smiled faintly, a small sign of approval. "Good." Desk.
"We leave at sundown. I'll explain everything on the way."
The rest of the day passed slowly. Jimmy stayed in town, gathering supplies and preparing for the journey. He noticed how the townsfolk watched him with increasing suspicion. Rumors began to spread about the cowboy who was seen talking to the Apache woman. Some shook their heads, muttering about how outsiders could never be trusted, while others whispered that Jimmy was making a mistake. But he paid them little mind. His focus was on the task ahead, on the people who needed his help, and on the woman who had dared to demand action without hesitation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the town, Jimmy mounted his horse again. Tala was waiting for him at the edge of town, her expression calm but determined. Together, they rode out of Red Willow, leaving the curious eyes of the townsfolk behind. The road ahead was uncertain, full of dangers they could not yet predict. But Jimmy felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, he was not just riding through life, he was riding towards something that mattered. As they disappeared into the fading light, the town of Red Willow settled into an uneasy quiet. Nobody spoke of what they had seen, but everyone knew that something had changed. A cowboy had answered a challenge, and an Apache woman had dared to speak her mind. Together they were heading into unknown territory, and whatever awaited them, it would not be simple, it would not be easy, and it would certainly not be forgotten. Jimmy glanced at Tala as they rode. "You don't waste words," he said with a small grin. "I don't have time to waste," she replied simply, eyes fixed on the horizon. And with that, they rode into the night. The first chapter of a story that would test courage, trust, and the limits of what one man and one woman could do together against the odds. The night was quiet as Jimmy and Tala rode through the open plains, the moon casting pale light over the rolling hills. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wild sage and distant pine. For a while, neither spoke. The rhythm of the horses' hooves against the hard ground was enough to fill the silence, and both seemed lost in thought. Jimmy had ridden across many lands and faced countless dangers, but there was something different about this journey. This was not about money or fame or even survival. This was about justice. And that made it heavier than any gunfight he had ever known. Finally, Tala broke the silence. "We can't go directly to the camp," she said softly. "The men we're after expect trouble. If we ride straight in, they'll be ready for us." "We need to be smart." Jimmy nodded, listening carefully. "What exactly are we dealing with?" he asked. "I need to know the full picture before we get anywhere near them." She glanced at him, her eyes sharp in the moonlight. "They are a group of settlers who have been taking what does not belong to them. Food, tools, supplies. They threaten anyone who stands in their way. My people have tried to reason with them, but the town refuses to help. That is why I came to you. You do not back down, and you can fight when it is necessary." Jimmy could feel the weight of her words. These were not petty thieves or troublemakers. They were people who had no regard for the lives of others, and they had already caused harm. And you want me to stop them? He asked, trying to understand the full danger of what he was agreeing to. Yes, Tala said simply. And we will not wait for the town to act.
They are too afraid. If we do nothing, more of my people will be hurt, and there will be no one to stop it.
Jimmy was silent for a moment, thinking. He had never been one to turn away from a challenge, especially when it involved protecting others. But he knew that this path would not be easy. The settlers were armed, the land was rough, and the townsfolk might not welcome the outcome. But he also knew that hesitation would only make things worse. Finally, he nodded. Brah. Then we do it, he said. Tell me the plan. Tala's face softened slightly, a small sign of approval. She explained that the gang of settlers had set up a small camp near the river, not far from the edge of the forest. They had been raiding nearby Apache supplies for weeks, taking food and tools that were essential for survival. The settlers believed that the Apache people were weak and that no one would challenge them. Tala wanted Jimmy to help confront the gang, retrieve what had been taken, and send a message that their actions would not go unpunished. Jimmy listened carefully, asking questions about the terrain, the number of men, and their routines. Tala answered with precision, showing that she knew the land and the people better than anyone else could.
Jimmy was impressed.
She was fearless, clever, and determined, qualities he admired, even if she could be blunt and impatient. As they rode closer to the river, Tala explained the importance of stealth. We cannot afford to be seen until we are ready, she said. If they know we are coming, they will scatter and hide, and the plan will fail.
Jimmy adjusted his saddle and nodded.
He trusted Tala's judgment. Together, they slowed their horses, moving quietly through the underbrush, keeping to shadows and avoiding open ground. The camp came into view as they crested a small hill, and Jimmy could see the glow of a fire and the figures of men moving about. Some were tending to horses, others were carrying supplies, places to retrieve stolen items, and the safest paths to approach without being noticed. The two of them worked silently, communicating with hand signals and quick glances.
Jimmy felt the thrill of anticipation. This was what he lived for, the combination of strategy, courage, and action.
But he also felt a sense of responsibility. He knew that any mistake could cost lives, both their own and those of the people they were trying to protect. Bravely. As they moved closer, Tala whispered, "We strike at first light. That is when they are least alert. We retrieve what we can and make them understand that this behavior cannot continue." Jimmy nodded again, feeling the tension in his chest. He had faced dangerous men before, but this was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice, for people who had no one else to defend them. He glanced at Tala, and for the first time he realized the depth of her courage. She was willing to risk everything for her people, and she expected the same from him. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, the two of them moved into action. They approached the camp carefully, using the cover of trees and rocks. Jimmy could hear the settlers talking quietly, unaware that danger was approaching. Tala signaled him to split up, taking a small path along the river while he approached from the opposite side. The plan worked perfectly. The settlers were caught by surprise when Jimmy and Tala appeared, retrieving stolen supplies and blocking any escape routes. Some of the men tried to resist, but Jimmy's presence and skill with his gun, combined with Tala's swift movements and sharp commands, quickly brought them under control. For a few moments there was chaos, shouts, the clatter of supplies, and the tension of confrontation. But Jimmy and Tala remained focused, guiding the situation with authority. They returned the stolen goods to Tala's people, ensuring that nothing was left behind. The settlers, though angry and shaken, realized that they had underestimated their opponents. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the river and trees, Jimmy and Tala took a moment to catch their breath. Jimmy could see the relief and gratitude on the faces of the people they had helped. Tala looked at him with a mixture of respect and satisfaction. "We did what needed to be done," she said. "The town may not understand, and there may be consequences for our actions." Jimmy nodded, understanding the warning. He had faced anger before, from men who thought they had the right to dictate justice. He knew that returning to the town would be difficult, but for now, he allowed himself a small sense of pride. They had succeeded in their mission, protecting the innocent and standing up to those who had caused harm. As they rode back toward Red Willow, the town slowly came into view. Jimmy could already feel the tension building, the looks of suspicion and curiosity waiting for them. He knew that what they had done would not be universally welcomed. Some would see them as heroes, others as troublemakers. But Jimmy also knew that standing up for what was right was never simple, and that courage often required facing the judgment of others. Tala rode beside him, calm and determined as ever. "The town will react," she said quietly. "Some may support us, others may not." "You need to be prepared for both!" Jimmy looked at her, appreciating her wisdom and strength. "I've faced worse," he replied, though he could feel the weight of what was coming. "We did the right thing, and that's what matters." People gathered along the streets, watching their approach, whispering to one another. Jimmy could hear snatches of conversation, some praising their actions, others questioning their motives. The town leaders in particular looked displeased, their faces hard with disapproval. As they reached the center of Red Willow, a small crowd had formed. Jimmy dismounted, keeping his hand near his holster, aware that tensions could rise quickly. Tala followed, her posture steady, her eyes never leaving the crowd. One of the town leaders stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Callahan, what do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "Taking matters into your own hands. Do you have any idea what you've started?" Jimmy met his gaze evenly. "I did what needed to be done," he said calmly. People were being harmed, and no one else would act. "I didn't ask for approval." Breath.
"I acted to protect the innocent," the crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others frowning.
Tala remained silent, letting Jimmy speak. She knew that his words would carry weight, and that the townsfolk needed to see the truth of their actions. The tension in the town was palpable. Jimmy knew that this confrontation was only the beginning, and that some people might not forgive or understand their choices. But he also knew that justice was rarely simple, and that doing the right thing often meant facing criticism and danger. As the day wore on, it became clear that opinions were divided. Some townsfolk came forward to thank Jimmy and Tala for their bravery, acknowledging the help they had provided. Others whispered threats and warnings, their anger simmering beneath polite faces. Jimmy felt the weight of their judgment, but he did not falter. He had chosen this path, and he was willing to face whatever consequences came with it. By evening, the town had settled into an uneasy calm. Jimmy and Tala had proven that they could act decisively and protect those in need, but the divide in Red Willow remained. Some respected their courage, others resented their boldness. Jimmy knew that the real test was yet to come. The townsfolk's reaction would determine whether they were heroes or targets. For now, though, Jimmy allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had confronted the gang, retrieved what was stolen, and protected the innocent. He glanced at Tala, who gave a small nod of approval. Together,
They had faced danger and emerged victorious.
But the challenges ahead were only beginning, and both knew that the path of justice was never easy. The sun rose slowly over Red Willow, casting long shadows along the wooden sidewalks and making the town appear almost peaceful. But beneath the calm surface, tension simmered. Jimmy and Tala had returned from the river camp with stolen supplies reclaimed and the settlers who had caused harm dealt with.
On the surface, their mission had succeeded, but the town's reaction was anything but simple.
From the moment they rode into town, it was clear that not everyone saw their actions as heroic. A small group of men gathered near the saloon, their arms crossed and faces hard. Whispers passed from one person to another, questions about the cowboy who had sided with the Apache, and rumors of alliances that some found threatening. The townsfolk were split. But some were impressed by Jimmy's courage, while others feared the disruption he had caused. Tala and Jimmy dismounted in the center of town.
Tala's gaze swept over the crowd, calm and steady, while Jimmy kept one hand near his holster, prepared for anything.
He had faced danger before, but there was something different about facing judgment from those who were supposed to be law-abiding citizens.
He knew that their disapproval could turn into anger at any moment. One of the town leaders, a tall, stern man named Harris, stepped forward. "Callahan," he said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You've crossed a line. You acted without our permission, and now you've brought the Apache into our town. Do you have any idea what you've started?"
Jimmy met his gaze evenly. "I know exactly what I've done," he said.
"People were being harmed. Supplies were stolen. I acted to protect the innocent when no one else would. I don't need your permission to do what's right." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, admiring his honesty and courage. Others frowned, their anger barely contained. It was clear that the town was divided, and Jimmy realized that this divide could grow dangerous. Harris's expression hardened. "You've made enemies here, Callahan. You may have thought you were helping, but some of us see your actions as a threat. If you continue on this path, it may cost you more than you're willing to pay."
Tala stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We did what needed to be done."
"The settlers were wrong, and the people I protect have every right to defend themselves. Callahan did not act out of malice. He acted out of justice." Some in the crowd looked at her with respect, recognizing her courage and determination. Others scowled, unwilling to hear her defense. The tension was growing, and Jimmy could sense that the town's anger was close to boiling over.
As the day wore on, the whispers turned into open confrontation.
A group of men gathered near the sheriff's office, shouting threats.
"He sided with the Apache!"
One of them yelled. "He's turned our town upside down. Someone needs to make him pay." Jimmy remained calm, though his senses were on high alert. He had faced worse odds before, but the idea of a town turning against him was unnerving. Tala stayed close, her eyes scanning the crowd, ready to act if necessary. She knew that they had won the battle at the river camp, but the battle for the town's acceptance, or at least its tolerance, was only beginning. The sheriff, a man named McAllister, tried to mediate.
"Everyone calm down," he called. "Callahan helped protect people."
"He did what any decent man would do. Threatening him will only make things worse." But the crowd was not easily calmed.
"Decent!"
shouted one of the settlers. "He sided with the Apache over us. He brought trouble here." Others joined in, their voices rising in anger. Jimmy realized that reasoning with them would not be enough. The town's emotions had been stirred, and fear and prejudice were stronger than logic. Burst. Tala touched his arm gently. "We need to be ready," she whispered. "Some of them will act on their anger soon. They may try to chase us out, or worse."
Ah! Jimmy nodded. He had expected this.
Brought Standing up for what was right often came with consequences, and he was prepared to face them. "Then we face it," he said quietly.
Together. By late afternoon, the situation reached a tipping point. A group of men, armed with rifles and pitchforks, approached Jimmy and Tala.
Brash. Their faces were hard with anger, and their shouts echoed through the streets. "Out of town!" one of them yelled. "You're not welcome here, Callahan. And you, Apache woman, you've caused enough trouble." The crowd around them began to murmur, some backing the angry men, others standing in shock at the open hostility. But Jimmy and Tala stood their ground, neither backing down. They knew that fleeing would show weakness, and they were not willing to surrender to fear or prejudice. Break. Tala raised her hand, signaling for calm, and spoke in a firm voice. "We have done nothing wrong.
We acted to protect people from harm. If you attack us, you will only make things worse for yourselves."
Breath. Think carefully before you act. Her words carried authority, but not everyone listened. One of the men stepped forward, raising his rifle.
"I don't care about words."
"This town will not be disrespected." Jimmy stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Tala. "Put that down," he said. "We don't want bloodshed, but we will defend ourselves if we must. Don't make a mistake you'll regret."
For a tense moment, neither side moved. The sun cast long shadows over the street, highlighting the standoff.
The air was thick with fear and anger, and Jimmy could feel the weight of the crowd's attention. It was clear that the town was at a crossroads. They could choose violence, or they could step back and consider what was truly right. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd.
Enough! It was an older man, respected in the town, known for his fairness. Look at what has happened.
Callahan acted to protect people from harm. He did not act to start trouble. If you cannot see that, then shame on you. Violence will solve nothing here. The crowd murmured, and some began to step back, reconsidering their anger. Jimmy felt a surge of relief.
It seemed that reason was returning, slowly but surely. Tala nodded at the older man, a small smile breaking through her serious expression.
"Bat, thank you," she said quietly. "Your voice matters more than you know." The group of armed men slowly lowered their weapons, though their expressions remained hard. Jimmy could see that not everyone was convinced. But the immediate threat had passed. The town would take time to accept what had happened, and some would never forgive. But for now, bloodshed had been avoided.
As evening fell, Jimmy and Tala walked through the town together. People watched them from windows and doorways, some with admiration, others with suspicion.
The events of the day would be talked about for weeks, and the story of the cowboy and the Apache woman would spread beyond Red Willow. Tala turned to Jimmy as they reached the edge of town.
"Pray, you see, not everyone will understand, and some will never forgive. But what we did was right. We cannot let fear or anger stop us from protecting those who need help."
Break. Jimmy nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "I know," he said, "but it's clear that our work is not finished. The town may not trust us, and some will still want revenge." Breaths. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Tala smiled faintly.
"I like that about you. You face danger, but you also see the bigger picture."
"That is rare." Jimmy chuckled softly. "I've learned over the years that courage alone is not enough. You need wisdom too."
Breath. The two of them sat for a while at the edge of town, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The town of Red Willow was quiet now, but the tension from earlier lingered in the air like a shadow.
Jimmy knew that the coming days would not be easy. Some townsfolk would continue to resent them, and whispers of revenge could turn into action. But he also knew that standing up for what was right was never easy, and that courage often meant facing hostility. As night fell, they prepared to rest, keeping watch over the town from a safe distance. Breath. Jimmy and Tala knew that they had won a victory, but the true challenge lay ahead. Earning the town's respect, ensuring the safety of Tala's people, and navigating the fragile line between heroism and defiance. For Jimmy, the day had been a lesson in more than just bravery. It was a lesson in understanding, patience, and the power of standing up for what was right, even when the world around him resisted. Tala, too, had shown that courage and wisdom could work together, and that speaking boldly could change the course of events. As they sat under the stars, the night quiet and still, Jimmy realized that this journey was far from over. The town had witnessed their courage, but opinions would remain divided. And yet, despite the uncertainty, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Together, he and Tala had faced danger and injustice, and survived. And together, they would face whatever came next. The next morning, the town of Red Willow was restless. Word had spread quickly about Jimmy Callahan and Tala, about what they had done at the river camp, and about how they had confronted the settlers. Some townsfolk whispered admiration, impressed that someone had stood up for what was right. Others whispered anger, their pride wounded, convinced that the cowboy and the Apache woman had brought trouble to their town. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and it didn't take long for the situation to become dangerous. Jimmy woke early, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had slept lightly, knowing that after the standoff yesterday, not everyone would be willing to let the matter rest. Tala was already awake, sharpening a small hunting knife and checking their supplies. She looked calm, but her eyes were alert. Both of them understood that the next hours could decide whether they would be forced to leave town or face violence. "We need a plan," Jimmy said quietly, breaking the silence.
Some of the townsfolk are angry enough to act.
"They won't wait for a decision from the leaders." Tala nodded.
I know.
"We need to be ready for anything. Some will come with words. Some may come with weapons. Either way, we have to stay calm and act with reason. If we show fear, it will only make them bolder."
They spent the morning observing the town from a safe distance, hidden behind barrels and crates near the edge of the main street. Jimmy could see groups of men gathering, whispering, pointing toward him and Tala.
It was clear that the anger from the previous day had not dissipated. The tension in the air was almost tangible, and Jimmy could feel the eyes of the town on him, as if waiting for a signal to strike. By midday, a group of men approached cautiously, their expressions hard and wary. They carried no guns, only sticks and farming tools. But Jimmy knew better than to underestimate them, breaking both. Anger could make even the smallest weapon dangerous. Tala moved beside him, her presence steadying him, reminding him that they were not alone. One of the men, a young and hot-headed settler named Carter, stepped forward. "Callahan!" he shouted. "We're not going to let you get away with this. You sided with the Apache, and you brought danger to our town. You need to leave before things get worse." Jimmy stood his ground. "I acted to protect people," he said firmly.
I didn't bring danger here. I stopped it. If you think that makes me your enemy, then you are mistaken.
"I will not run from what is right." Carter's face twisted with anger. "Right? You think this is right? You've disrespected this town and the people in it. Some of us are willing to teach you a lesson." Tala stepped forward, her voice strong and commanding. "Violence will solve nothing," she said. "We are not here to fight, but we will defend ourselves if we must. Look at what has already happened. People were being harmed, and we stopped it. That is justice. not disrespect. The young man hesitated, caught between his anger and the truth of her words. Burnt. Some of the men behind him looked uncertain as well, but others were still hard with anger. Jimmy could sense that the situation could escalate at any moment, and he tightened his grip on his revolver, keeping it low and ready. Suddenly, one of the more aggressive settlers, a man named Lawson, raised a pitchfork and took a step forward. "I don't care about words," he shouted. "You need to pay for what you did. You can't just go around deciding what's right and wrong." Psst. He could see the fear and determination in the eyes of the crowd, but he also saw doubt beginning to creep in. Tala raised a hand and motioned for them to stop. Her calm presence had a way of forcing people to listen, even in the midst of anger. "Enough!" she called out. "Bad. You have a choice. You can continue this path and bring harm to yourselves and others, or you can step back and think about what truly matters. Bray, are you willing to risk your lives over pride and fear?" The crowd hesitated. Some of the men lowered their weapons slightly, unsure if they should continue. Jimmy stepped forward as well, adding his voice. "I don't want to fight any of you," he said, "but I will defend myself and Tala if necessary. Think carefully before you make a mistake you cannot undo." For a tense moment, silence fell over the street. The wind rustled through the wooden buildings, carrying the scent of dust and hay. Jimmy could feel the weight of the townsfolk's eyes on him, some filled with anger, some with curiosity, and some with respect. Finally, Lawson stepped back, lowering his pitchfork, though his face remained hard. "This isn't over," he said, "but we'll wait. For now." The group of men retreated, but the warning was clear. Jimmy and Tala were not safe. They had faced one wave of anger, but more could come. The town was divided, and there were still those who believed that the cowboy and the Apache woman were a threat that needed to be eliminated. Tala looked at Jimmy, her expression serious. "We can't let our guard down," she said. "They'll be watching us, testing us, trying to provoke a mistake. We need to be ready at all times." Jimmy nodded. He had expected challenges in this town, but the intensity of the backlash was greater than he had imagined. Standing up for what was right often came with consequences, and he was learning that lesson firsthand. The rest of the day was spent moving cautiously through town, keeping a low profile while observing the townsfolk's reactions. Some offered small gestures of respect, quietly acknowledging that Jimmy and Tala had done what was necessary. Others avoided their gaze entirely, muttering under their breath or casting suspicious looks from behind closed doors. The tension was like a shadow that followed them everywhere, making it clear that any wrong move could ignite violence once again. By evening, Jimmy realized that their safety depended not just on their courage, but on their ability to read the town, to understand who could be reasoned with and who could not. He and Tala retreated to the edge of town, where they could plan their next steps in private. "We can't stay here long," Jimmy said quietly. "Some of these men will come after us if they think we're vulnerable."
We need a way to protect ourselves and Tala's people.
Tala nodded. "We'll find a way. The key is patience and strategy."
We cannot let anger dictate our actions. If we act rashly, it could end badly for everyone.
As night fell, they took turns keeping watch, alert to any movement in the town. Jimmy thought about what had brought him here, how a simple decision to help had escalated into a conflict with an entire community. He realized that courage alone would not be enough. They would need wisdom, patience, and careful planning to navigate the growing tension. In the quiet hours before dawn, Tala spoke softly. "You've shown courage, Jimmy. But now, we need more than that. We need allies, or at least people who understand the truth. Otherwise, the town's anger could consume everything we've done." Jimmy listened, knowing she was right. They had achieved a small victory by confronting the settlers and returning the stolen goods, but the real challenge lay ahead. Winning the town's acceptance, or at least tolerance, would be harder than any fight he had faced before. The night passed slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. They could hear distant voices and the occasional creak of a wooden door as someone moved about the town. Jimmy and Tala remained alert, ready to respond to any threat. They knew that the town was watching, waiting, and that the anger of those who had been humiliated or challenged could erupt at any moment. By morning, they had made a plan. They would continue to move carefully, protect Tala's people, and show through their actions that they were not a threat, but a force for justice.
They knew it would not be easy, and they knew that some townsfolk would never forgive them.
But they also knew that doing the right thing sometimes meant standing alone, and they were prepared to do so, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Jimmy and Tala rode quietly through the outskirts of Red Willow, alert to every movement. They had survived the initial backlash, but the danger was far from over. The town's anger could flare again at any moment, and they would need all their courage and wisdom to navigate the challenges ahead. For Jimmy, the lesson was clear. Doing what is right is rarely simple, and standing up for justice often comes with a heavy price. For Tala, it was a reminder that courage and strategy must always work together. Together they faced the uncertain day ahead, knowing that the story of their actions would not end here. Attention in Red Willow had not eased. The events of the past few days had left the town restless, divided, and watchful. Jimmy Callahan and Tala knew this, and they moved carefully through the streets, keeping a low profile while trying to maintain their presence. Every glance from a townsfolk could be a warning or a threat. Every whisper could mean support or an attempt at plotting revenge. The town was a powder keg, and they were acutely aware that the smallest spark could set it off. Jimmy had ridden into Red Willow seeking nothing more than temporary shelter, but he had been pulled into a whirlwind of conflict he hadn't anticipated. Tala's urgency, her courage, and her unwavering sense of justice had drawn him in. Together they had confronted a gang of settlers, recovered stolen supplies, and defended the innocent. But that victory had come at a cost, suspicion and anger from those who believed that their actions had upset the balance of the town. As morning broke, the streets seemed deceptively calm. The sun cast long shadows across the dusty sidewalks, and the wind carried the scent of hay and warm earth. Jimmy and Tala moved cautiously, scanning for signs of trouble. Despite the quiet, both knew that a confrontation could come at any moment. They had faced danger before, but the anger of a town was unpredictable. Their attention was soon drawn to a group of townsfolk gathered in the square. Some carried tools, others were unarmed but tense, and all had hard expressions. At the center of the group stood Lawson, the settler who had previously threatened Jimmy with a pitchfork. His face was set in a scowl, and his eyes were fixed on Jimmy and Tala.
They think we're a threat, Tala whispered to Jimmy. We need to act carefully.
One wrong move and it could turn deadly.
Jimmy nodded, his hand resting lightly on his revolver.
I know, but we can't run forever.
If we show fear, they will sense it and push further. We face this together.
Tala nodded, and together they approached the crowd, their pace steady, their posture calm but ready. Jimmy raised his voice so that everyone could hear. "We are not your enemies," he said firmly. "We acted to protect people from harm. No one else would act, so we did. If you judge us for that, then you misunderstand what justice is." For a moment, the crowd was silent. Jimmy could feel the tension thickening, like the heat before a summer storm. Pray. Some townsfolk looked uncertain, shifting from foot to foot. Others scowled, their anger simmering beneath the surface. It was clear that the town's judgment would not come easily. Lawson stepped forward, his voice harsh. "You think your actions make you better than us?" he demanded. "You brought the Apache into our town, and you humiliated us in front of everyone.
We can't forgive that so easily. Tala took a step forward, her voice firm and unwavering.
We did not come here to humiliate anyone, she said.
We came to stop harm. The stolen supplies were returned, and the people who were being threatened are safe.
You can either accept that or continue down a path that will bring trouble for everyone.
Some of the townsfolk murmured in agreement, nodding subtly. Others remained stubborn, their faces hard and unwilling to budge. Jimmy knew that reason alone might not be enough. The town's anger had grown too strong, and only a demonstration of strength, courage, and fairness could truly change hearts. He decided to act carefully, showing both authority and compassion. "If you want justice, it has been served," he said, keeping his voice calm. "We did what was necessary to protect people. No one was harmed beyond what was unavoidable, and the stolen goods are back where they belong. Let this be the end of the conflict, and we can all move forward." Tala stood beside him, her presence commanding respect. She did not threaten, she did not beg, she simply stated the truth. Her courage gave Jimmy strength, and together they became a visible symbol of reason amidst the crowd's emotions. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, an older man from the back of the crowd stepped forward. He was well respected in the town, known for his fairness and wisdom. "Let them speak the truth," he said.
Callahan acted to protect lives, and Tala acted to save her people. That is not something to be punished.
"If you continue to seek revenge, it will only bring shame to the town." The words had an effect. Some of the men lowered their heads, realizing the wisdom in his voice. Others muttered under their breath, still reluctant to let go of their pride, but the immediate threat had diminished. Jimmy felt a mixture of relief and tension.
The battle for the town's acceptance was not fully over, but the immediate danger had passed.
Ala's eyes softened slightly as she glanced at Jimmy. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly.
"Some will never forgive, but we've proven that courage and justice can prevail. We just need to keep steady." Jimmy nodded, appreciating the truth in her words. He had faced countless dangers before, but this had been different. This was not just about skill with a gun or strength in a fight. This was about navigating hearts and minds, standing for justice in a world where fear and pride often ruled. The following days were spent carefully rebuilding trust. Jimmy and Tala moved through the town, helping where they could, showing respect to those who had been angry, and quietly defending Tala's people from further harassment. Slowly, the atmosphere began to change. Small gestures of support appeared. A nod here, a thank you there. Some townsfolk still whispered in disapproval, but the tide was turning. At the same time, Jimmy and Tala focused on preparing for the future. They knew that the town would always be wary, and that there were still challenges ahead. But they also knew that their courage, their fairness, and their willingness to stand up for what was right had made a difference. For Tala's people, the stolen goods and protection from harm meant survival. For Jimmy, the experience had been a lesson in more than courage. It was a lesson in integrity, strategy, and patience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the town in golden light, Jimmy and Tala sat at the edge of town overlooking the quiet streets. They had survived the backlash, protected the innocent, and proven that justice could be achieved even in the face of anger and fear.
"You've done well," Tala said quietly.
"Not everyone will understand, and some may never forgive, but you've shown courage and wisdom. That is rare."
"I've learned from you," he replied. "You taught me that courage alone isn't enough." Rebuked.
You need strategy, patience, and the ability to face people's fear and anger without losing yourself. Tala nodded.
"And you've shown me that sometimes, even in the face of danger, one person can make a difference." Breaths.
Together we were stronger than anyone expected. As night fell, they returned to their temporary shelter, knowing that the town would continue to watch them and that the memory of their actions would linger for years. Jimmy understood that some would tell stories of a cowboy who defied the town, while others would speak of Tala, the Apache woman who dared to demand justice. Together they had become part of Red Willow's history, their courage leaving a mark that could not be erased. The following days passed with careful balance. The town began to return to its normal rhythm, though the events would not be forgotten. Slowly, respect replaced suspicion, and whispers of admiration began to spread. Jimmy and Tala remained vigilant, ensuring that the peace they had fought for endured. Finally, the day came when Jimmy knew it was time to leave Red Willow. The town had begun to accept, or at least tolerate, their presence. Tala's people were safer. The settlers had been warned, and the town had learned that justice was not always simple, but it could be achieved when courage and fairness guided actions. Jimmy mounted his horse, feeling the weight of the journey they had shared. Tala stood beside him, her expression calm but proud. "It's time," she said. "The town will survive, and so will the people. Our work here is done." Jimmy nodded. "It's been a lesson I won't forget," he said. "And I won't forget you, Tala. You've shown me what it truly means to stand up for what is right." With a final glance at Red Willow, they rode out together, leaving the town behind, but carrying the memory of their actions with them. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they faced it with courage, wisdom, and the knowledge that they had made a real difference. As the sun rose over the plains, casting light across the rolling hills, Jimmy and Tala disappeared into the horizon. The story of their courage, their defiance, and their commitment to justice would be remembered in Red Willow for years to come. They had faced danger, anger, and prejudice, and had emerged stronger, leaving a legacy that would inspire others to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost.